I am a massive Wicked fan, and I went into the film super skeptical because who can trust an adaptation these days? And I came out thoroughly delighted and then went to see it 7 more times, meaning I saw the film just 1 time less than the times I've seen the stage show. When I came out of the show, my first word to my friend was, no notes, 10 out of 10. Since then, that sentiment has been revised a bit to some notes, but still one of my favorite films I've seen and a genuinely fabulous adaptation. That said, as someone who really loves the show and also loves the film, I wanted to go through some of the adaptation changes made between them and talk about the things that I liked, the changes that I missed, or even that I outright disliked. This is going to be a little bit of a different video. I do have a script and notes, but I'm also going to be talking about things as they sort of come up in my mind. So a little more relaxed, a little more off the cuff. Before we start, a real quick shout out to my patrons over on Patreon who saw my notes for this video early. If you want to support the channel, and I'm always super appreciative, Patreon is the way to do that at patreon.com/5x5takes. So without further ado, let's start with the positive. The way the show immediately opens with the hat. That is cinema. One thing that this film does very, very well, which will be a trend in many of the adaptive changes that I liked, is that it uses the change in medium to its advantage. This is film, not stage. There are things that you can do in film that you can't do on stage, and vice versa. And very often, the film enhances the story by doing things that can't typically be done on a stage. This kind of very cinematic opening is one of them. Hearing Glinda's voice through a speaker or radio or whatever it is chilling to the bone. Something you can't do on stage is zoom in to see an actor's micro-expressions, which they do wonderfully here in No One Mourns the Wicked. The whole point of this opening is that there's this dissonance, there's this tragedy just beneath the surface that Glinda can't quite afford to show. And I love that here they make a point to linger on her expressions, to linger on her hesitation, and I specifically love the little beat where she's looking at the effigy, pained, mourning, and then the second that one of the Munchkinlanders comes up to her and hands her the torch, she immediately shifts into that camera-ready, perfect smile. It's such a great bit. In general, I love what they did with No One Mourns the Wicked. The choreography, the effigy, and the cut to Ozdust and the field scene was like a gunshot to the face in the first song. They also expand on Elphaba's backstory in No One Mourns the Wicked, and they add a couple new lines for it. I think this is great. It's really nice to actually get to see a young Elphaba and see, even for a tiny, tiny moment, the relationship between her and Nessa as kids. I think that's one of the things that can sometimes feel underwritten, so any little bit is great. And most specifically, Elphaba being raised by animals is such a great addition. It's not in the original show, and I think it adds so much depth to why Elphaba connects so deeply with the animal plight. It's not just her innate empathy, it's not just that she's relating because she herself is a pariah. The connection is even more personal, and we see that mutual connection between her and Dulcibert, that Dulcibert also clearly felt a kinship towards this kid that is immediately othered upon being born. There's also a really slight lyric change that adds to this. When Elphaba is first delivered, they change the line from "it's atrocious" to "it's uncanny." It's really slight, but it significantly softens the animal's response to Elphaba, and it makes it less one of disgust and more one of surprise, and that distinction emphasizes the connection and empathy between the two of them, as the film will continue to do. In the show, Pfannee and Shenshen are 2 largely non-speaking roles, so seeing them actually get to be people, even if they're mostly just one-off punchlines, is actually really fun.
Okay, excuse me.
Like, raise your hand.
Like I said earlier, I like feeling like these 2 are actually sisters. A bummer for me is that the relationship feels underwritten in the actual show, which is unfortunate because I think that relationship has the potential to be just as impactful a tragedy as any other in the show. There is so much in that dynamic, and it is really devastating seeing how much these 2 actually care about each other, knowing how this won't last and they will be wrenched away from each other. I like the little bits of tension we see here of how much Elphaba advocates for her sister's autonomy, which on the flip side just makes Nessa's embarrassment towards her even worse. If anything, I hope there's even a tad more in part 2. Okay, so in the original show, Elphaba starts out enrolled in the school already, and it's only to take care of Nessa. This is a line.
I'm only sending you to this school for one reason.
I know, to look after Nessa.
In the film, they changed this, and I think understandably so, in order to give Nessa and the disabled character plotline at least a little more agency. I don't have any particularly strong feelings about how this affects the plot or doesn't. I like this little added bit, where Bach and Nessa have that moment where they both can't see the speaker and relate over it. Obviously, their situations aren't exactly comparable, but it's a nice added bonding moment. Again, great visual storytelling. It's so simple, but this moment where we see the portrait of the wizard fall away to reveal animal professors is such a quick, shorthand, effective bit of world building. Again, this is stuff that you can't really do as effectively on stage, and I think it's wonderful. In the show, The Wizard and I, Elphaba just basically stands on the stage and sings at the audience. But here, obviously, there's a little bit more to play around with. I like that we get to see more of Shiz, and specifically, I think it's so cute and it's so great that they show Elphaba flying a little bit when she's excited. Not only is this adorable, this sets up her flying later and the sort of repeated theme of her emotions being connected to her magic. Also, speaking of Wizard and I, thank God there are scenes between The Wizard and I and What Is This Feeling? Because in the stage show, the poor Elphaba actor has to go immediately from belting the last line of Wizard and I right into What Is This Feeling? I don't mind it, but it can be a little bit jarring to just go from song to song. With no real proper shift in those scenes, I think the pacing is a little bit better.
I can't hear your guesses because this is a letter.
That's just funny. Once again, using the medium to our advantage. Turning What Is This Feeling into a montage? Banged. This is a great efficient use of time to show this dynamic evolving, to show us different locations in the school, to give us a sense of scale. I also think the choreography in this is just insanely catchy. They add some lines here for Elphaba that work really well on a couple levels.
I could care less what others think.
Couldn't.
First, I think this is great because it emphasizes the parallels between
You couldn't care less what other people think. Though, I doubt that.
and
She doesn't give a twig what anyone thinks.
Of course she does. She just pretends not to.
And it's especially nice seeing Elphaba have this moment of reading Glinda like a book and clocking their shared but divergent neurosis about being liked. I think this sets up the parallels between them, which are core to the story. And Erivo's Elphaba here comes across a little bit more collected and world-weary in a way than some of the edgier or brasher takes on Elphaba. Sometimes these lines are sort of yelled, exasperated.
All right, fine. Might as well get this over with.
It's not better or worse. I enjoy them both. It's just a different flavor for this character. Here, this is an Elphaba that's just a little bit tired of it all. She's made this speech before, she's been here, but it's not pissing her off in the same way. And it's this sort of calm resignation that kind of makes her hope here even more heartbreaking. Fiyero's introduction is a little bit different in the film. In the show, he just shows up and meets everyone. In the film, he meets Elphaba a little bit sooner, which adds to their dynamic a bit because it shows both of them interacting without any sort of, if you will, pretense. They did cut a couple lines that I always find pretty funny.
And you're sleeping?
Of course. It's daytime.
And
Is this really how you go through life? Nearly knocking people over and not even noticing them.
Maybe the driver saw green and thought it meant go.
in a beautiful turn of events, Jonathan Bailey's Fiyero is one of the warmest I've ever seen.
No, I did not eat grass as a child.
Oh, you didn't? I did.
Fiyero can sometimes come across like just a dick in the early bits of the show, depending on how he's played, which is fine because we eventually see that facade melt away. But here, he's instantly a lot more likable, and we see those layers and depth a lot more, and a lot quicker. Sometimes you can wonder if Fiyero's just a manic pixie dream boyfriend, which he kind of is because it's not his show, it's not his story, and that's fine. But with Jonathan Bailey's, we already see the warmth of the man who, spoiler,
and look, if it'll make you happy, of course I'll marry you.
Immediately this became one of my favorite Fiyero portrayals. I'll continue to say it. Another thing that you can do on screen and not on stage is show close-ups. Here we get multiple close-ups of both of them after this exchange, and it adds so much depth to this one interaction. There's an acknowledgement here. It's almost playful. There's antagonism, but there's also, above all, this bit of recognition. You know, recognition of the self and the other. So yes, they're sparring, but even in just this beat, we also see how deeply fascinated they are with each other. This is a really small moment that's added, but once again does really good character work in showcasing Elphaba's gentleness with those that she feels a camaraderie with. She normally has a lot of defenses with anybody else, but of course she feels less defensive and innately connected to Dillamond as another othered person, so it's great to have more opportunities to see what Elphaba's like with her walls down. The film also added a scene of the sorcery seminar. Something I always found a bit funny and kind of bizarre is that for all the build-up and emphasis on the sorcery seminar and how prestigious it is, we see exactly 0 of it. So I do like this even short scene. It's nothing crazy, but you can see Morrible's wheels turning about Elphaba's moldable potential. You get more emphasis on Elphaba's emotion magic. If anything, this scene just makes me really feel the absence of a different scene for how much of a big deal the show makes about Elphaba inviting Glinda to join the seminar. We never see that either, and I really do wish we'd had a single scene of Glinda and Elphaba in the seminar together. I know there's the deleted scene of them discussing, presumably post-lesson, but it's not quite the same. The film also did the impossible, or the improbable, and made this, which was probably a lot of people's skippable song, into a not skippable song and scene. I jest, but I think it's an important scene, but the music itself is nothing crazy. But they really fleshed it out here. I love the tenderness between Elphaba and Dillamond. I especially love the inclusion of other animals. Again, it makes the world feel bigger and more lived in. I think the shadow storytelling is also a nice stylistic touch. Also, like, for some reason, half the live shows I've been to, some people in the audience almost always laugh when Dillamond isn't able to speak for a second. And I never got it. It always made me feel really fucking weird. Like, this moment is very obviously trying to signal something bad, like something bad happening. It should give you chills in a bad way. Why are we laughing? Anyway, they also cut Elphaba's last line here. It couldn't happen here in Oz. This changes the meaning ever so slightly. With the line, we can infer that Elphaba, despite her hardships, clearly doesn't view them as something systemic, right? Oz isn't a place where that kind of persecution could happen, she thinks, and this maybe speaks to her relative privilege as a governor's daughter. Without the line, she's a little more wise to the world. They also removed whatever this silly little dance move is that Fiyero does in Dancing Through Life. This is not a complaint, I just wanted to show it. Again, delightful character beats that you can do on film. Linger on a facial expression. The depth that we get from Glinda in just this one beat is wonderful. Glinda brought this hat with her to school, so does she actually hate it, or is it sentimental for her? This beat, I think, lends itself a bit to that interpretation, that as socially savvy as she may be, Glinda is also a young person subject to external judgment and power dynamics. Her having affection for the hat at all, I think, is a wonderful bit of complexity here. There's also a second beat where she lingers after giving Elphaba the hat, where we see a flash of remorse across her face. I have similar feelings about this. I think it's just a very easy way to add depth. A great example of taking something iconic, the pink dress from the show, which remained unchanged for 20 plus years, and making something even more iconic. This is great. Ozdust being an underwater speakeasy is such a fun choice. Obviously, in the show, it is not that, and I think that is just so fun. They could have made it anything, but they made it this. And I especially love the animals playing instruments. I feel like this is, again, great, subtle world building. Like, of course, this is where the ever-persecuted animals would play. I liked Bach and Nessa's dance. It feels much less condescending than some parts of the show can in this dynamic. We, the audience, know that not everything is above board here, but whereas sometimes in the show it can feel like it's just a chore for Bach to be around her, here they actually feel like they have a real rapport. You can see the actual affection that they both have for each other. I know some people thought that the dance scene went on too long, and I can see what you mean, but I loved every second of this. I think it puts us viscerally, uncomfortably, exactly in this moment. And as usual, the up-close focus on both their faces brings you nearly to tears. I just have a bunch of positive stuff to say about this. This is such a small change, but it's so fun. It's so charming. Ariana really chews the scenery here, and it's great. I found this to be such a delightful homage to how every Glinda almost tries to make the elphaba break in these scenes on stage, and it's just a ton of fun to watch. Also, every elphaba is different in how she plays her response to this, obviously. And I like that here, Erivo's elphaba is kind of into it. She's along for the ride. She's not being dragged. And I think it's a nice way to show that while elphaba does keep up that prickly exterior and she wants to not be bothered by others' perceptions, she ultimately does want to be accepted and included. That's a key part of her arc, too. This is such a good bit of physical continuity. In the stage show, there's not a repeated dance move that they do, and here there is. These two have always been speaking a language all their own, whether verbally sparring or whatever this is. I don't have a lot more to say about this. I think it's just absurdly tender, and between that and the looks between them, I could melt. This is another adorable beat that adds to their friendship. It also changes the meaning of elphaba inviting Glinda to come with her a little bit. In the show, it almost feels like it could have a little bit of pity and a little bit of guilt. Glinda cries in her arms, ostensibly about Fiyero, but we'll get there, and then elphaba hugs her and invites her, and then Glinda's fine. Here, elphaba gets on the train alone, reads Glinda's words, pauses, and then asks her to come with. So it's more of a spur of the moment and a pensive beat for elphaba. And it feels like it's more about their connection than any sort of pity or guilt, which I think is great. The beat that Edina and Kristen have with their respective elphaba and Glinda is very cute. Yes, it is indulgent. Yes, it is fan service. But as usual, I am a fan, I am being serviced, I'm not going to complain. I like that they slow this moment down just for a beat. The pause, the nod, another soft and quiet beat that works really well on film. This is another added line that I love.
You can do anything.
Anything that adds to the elphaba-Glinda friendship is points in my book. That is the backbone of this show, so moments like these go a long way.
Elphaba, you're up.
A man.
Something I like in the film is that Morrible feels like a lot more of a serious antagonist. In the stage show, she can be kind of over the top and camp at points, which is not bad. But Michelle Yeoh made her genuinely terrifying at points here, which I think bodes very well for Act 2. In particular, Morrible's ongoing disdain for Glinda and simultaneous grooming of elphaba comes across even more here. Also, I like the chase scene through the castle. In the show, they just run and then are in the attic, but the film gives us a much more drawn-out chase sequence. Sure, this is time spent, but I think it adds to the scale and the stakes. I love the labyrinth feel. With all the green, it almost makes it feel like a hedge maze. I really really like when Glinda picks the cloak from a rack of various outfits. I think it's a little bit more realistic than the stage show, where she just finds an ominous black cloak conveniently there. There's this beat in the show where they have Elphaba stand up, wearing the cloak, wearing the hat, holding the broom, and everything pauses, and very often there's an applause because the show goes, look, she's in the outfit now. And they do it in the film as well. It just feels a little bit less goofy that there's not just a random cloak there to complete the transformation. More great use of close-ups. The morrible hug was added in the film, and this just continues to emphasize Morrible's chess master manipulation behavior. I like how we see her making the calculation. I like how we see Glinda hesitate. I like how this sets up the entire dynamic for Act 2, of Glinda simultaneously making a choice and also at once kind of trapping herself, and points out to us that Morrible has been acutely observing all of this the whole time. She's always been calculating about this dynamic, and now that she sees that there are vulnerabilities that she can exploit in Glinda, mayhaps setting her up in a position that she knows Glinda will have a hard time resisting, like a public figure, this becomes really, really interesting. Once again, great use of medium. The fade-out scene across Oz gave me chills. It really felt like it was adding to the scale of Elphaba's sudden public enemying. And even though it's a small beat, getting to see Nessa in that moment continued to underline that dynamic. In the show, they never explicitly say what happened to Elphaba's father, but we get this little scene in the movie. Nessa will later say that he died of shame, embarrassed to death, which I always took as ambiguous enough to refer to something like this, like a heart attack, or, you know, something a little more intentional. This was a change that I thought I heard wrong at first. Changing get her to kill her? What a way to up the stakes. The first time I heard this, I think I audibly gasped. You might say it looked a little silly, but personally, I loved the homage to the stage flying scene with Elphaba's long-ass cape. An overarching thing that I loved was all of the uses of the score made me insane. The way that the score would interweave various motifs from what is now part 1 and also part 2 at unexpected times was like a punch to the face. Obviously, the stage show has a score too, but it's different here. And they specifically peppered little bits of future or past songs in between different moments. For example, in No One Mourns the Wicked, they had a brief for good tease, which nearly knocked me out of my seat. They also have a little tease of that in Popular, right at the moment when...
You're beautiful.
Also, at the train scene, they have a thank goodness tease. It's like an attempt on my life. This is the kind of thing that if you've seen the show before, you go, oh, thanks, and then get emotionally affected about it. Okay, adaptation changes that I either missed or disliked a little bit. I do wish they'd kept a bit more of the extended partial overture into No One Mourns the Wicked. Personally, I really like the build-up that the original has. I cannot play it for copyright reasons, but go look it up and you'll see what I mean. It's not a huge deal. They cut a few lines in this, some that I think were a good idea and some that I found myself missing. Specifically, they cut...
It's good to see me, isn't it? Yeah! Oh, no need to respond. That was rhetorical.
Which I read they rationalized as, there's no audience to really make that joke land. Sure. They also cut the joke,
Because there has been so much rumor and speculation, innuendo, outuendo.
this opening immediately feels a lot darker and more serious. You can take the light tone that Glinda has in the show as more of her overcompensating in her desperation and grief, trying to maintain a lighter facade. But I also get why they omitted the lines for the tone that they're going for. They also cut,
Is it true you are her friend?
Well, it depends what you mean by friend.
which personally I think was unfortunate. I like that line. Another line they cut was,
But You must understand, it was a long time ago. And we were both very young.
These slight changes between the film and the show in this scene have the effect of making this flashback feel a little more wistful in the film. Like Glinda is actually letting herself indulge in the truth of the memory and actually share it a little. Versus in the show, she still seems afraid and a little distrustful of the Ozian's ability to really empathize with Elphaba. I've praised how this sequence is done with the flashback in the film, and I do love it, but this specific sequence as we lead from the present into the flashback is one of my favorite parts of the whole show. It's when the magic just completely envelops me. There's something about the flashback slowly creeping up on Glinda while the music quiets down. The actors slowly coming in, Glinda looking lost and disoriented as we fade into the past. And then Elphaba runs on stage, the iconic moment, and everyone claps, and she's there with her big $1 million innocent, naive smile, not knowing everything that's gonna happen. And then Glinda reaches for her. This is one of the moments that just absolutely wrecks me, and the kind of shit that continues to give me chills every time I see it. Obviously, this entire thing is suited for stage, and that's fine. I just love it so much. This is one of the lines that I was really sad wasn't there.
You shouldn't let ignorant statements like that bother you. I mean, I always do, but you shouldn't.
It's so simple, but it's so good. Not only is this line incredibly endearing and very funny when well delivered, it's such a definitive character line for Elphaba. It ties in beautifully with Glinda's later realization.
Of course she does. She just pretends not to.
Again, of course she cares. Her big I Want song is her pouring her heart out about how badly she wants to be liked and validated and celebrated by everyone. In tandem with this, ditto for another throwaway line that leads up to Dancing Through Life. Elphaba and Nessa are talking, and they start talking about Fiyero and the party, and Elphaba says,
It's absurd. The celebratory appears never goes off to worship him at some cultish social gathering.
This is another one that was cut that I always find extremely endearing. She's just a girl. She's just an 18-year-old with semi-justified disgust and disdain towards sycophantic college kids and popularity contests, especially as someone constantly excluded on the basis of green. Mileage of Elphaba's prickliness varies depending on her portrayal, but Elphaba acts like she doesn't give a fuck, and this results in sometimes even acting like she's above her peers. But I always love her little too cool to be cool, scoffing at teen behavior lines, especially when it's then undermined by Nessa's excitement and then the warmth that Elphaba responds with. We do get something that feels close enough in the very funny,
I'm gonna go study outside, I can't.
Not sure exactly where to put this, but the falling asleep lion cub scene is changed pretty significantly. In the show, pretty hilariously, Glinda isn't even in that scene. I always find this so funny because you can see that the writers could not figure out how to make this scene work with Glinda in it. This is a scene that is going to further Fiyero and Elphaba's relationship, and it just couldn't work with Glinda still there. And we know that she's in this class. This is the same history class that she was in a couple scenes ago. Because it would beg the question, Elphaba's relationship with Glinda has deepened by this point, that would she really subconsciously magic her in the same way while excluding Fiyero? In the show, they also don't go to sleep. They're kind of puppeted. It's actually kind of unnerving. I enjoy it. Anyway, here they put Glinda back in the scene, but then put her to sleep. So there's implications there to unravel. I don't dislike it necessarily, it's just still a little bit funny. Kicking and screaming that this line was taken from us. This is one of the cutest, sweetest moment between these two.
You look positively emerald.
It's also a line that's often compared to Fiyero's spoiler.
It's not lying. It's looking at things another way.
Which I won't get into, but it is funny. Anyway, the two of them fully walking on air in their little one short day vacation, and the compliment Glinda chooses for Elphaba is one highlighting her greenness in a positive way. Put it back. My one overall gripe with this film is like, okay, this is a film. You had nearly 3 hours to adapt the first act of a 2-hour and 45-minute show, which I think is fair, because as much as I love and adore Wicked, the pacing, especially in Act 2, is unforgivably bonkers. But what's even hypothetically passable on stage does not work on film. So I get splitting it. And not just that, I was looking forward to added time. One of the things that I always found myself wanting when it came to Wicked was more downtime, more beats where we get to see these people, and especially Elphaba and Glinda, because the show is built around their relationship and their bond, more beats of them just hanging out, of just downtime, where it's not that there's a bunch of stuff happening and high stakes, but where we just get to see their friendship neutral and develop. We get parts of that in Popular, but I really would have liked a little bit more time between Popular, where they bond for the first time, and then them leaving for the Emerald City as established best friends. This is something that I don't mind terribly in the stage version, because you're sort of meant to understand these scenes as vignettes, right? We understand that there's time passing between these scenes. They're not literally 1 second after the other. However, now that we have a film, I was thinking to myself, wonderful. Now we will get even 1 or 2 added scenes where they're just hanging out in their dorm, or drinking at the shiz bar, right? This is the kind of stuff that you have the opportunity now to add, because the more ordinary and mundane time you spend with these people, the more impactful it is when they're wrenched apart, the more deeply the emotional beats between them hit, because you have spent actual time with their friendship. Like, speaking to this point, I saw a lot of comments online that were like, I didn't believe they were ever friends, we never saw them hang out. And I think that's so sad, because to a degree they kind of have a point. I think we're innately more forgiving when we see this on stage, but it's so much more noticeable with the more realism-adjacent movie. And so it's a little bit disappointing that with all the added time, none of it, it seems, was allocated to this. And what's even more maddening, to be honest, is that some of these were filmed. There is a friendship montage that we know was filmed, that we know was cut. A montage is a great way to show these things without taking up too much space. Where is the poppy field scene? There's also a little deleted scene that was an addition that the film made of Glinda sticking up for Elphaba at the train station to her father. Not only is this a great beat for their friendship, that we can see Glinda's immediate scary dog privileges and loyalty to Elphaba.
I remember thinking, I'm about to beat this bitch up.
But it's also just funny, and it's a great bit of character work for Glinda herself. On a lighter note, I know that they're including her blue dress later, but I really mourn some of Glinda's wardrobe. The show opens with her in a big, bubbly blue dress, and also ends with the same dress. And then there's also the iconic yellow dress for the entire Emerald City and Defying Gravity sequence. I really miss the yellow dress, not just for aesthetics, but I think it's a nice bit of color storytelling to show Glinda starting to dress in shades that are closer to green than to pink. There aren't many things that I outright disliked, because first of all, I'm a lover, not a fighter, and secondly, this film is legitimately a great adaptation. But here we go. You've heard it, everyone's talked about it, I'm not gonna make you sit through a whole other speech, but cutting up Defying Gravity was a mistake. Where's the momentum? This is just a really unfortunate place to be jerked around in what should be the climax of the film. The second that she jumps out of the window, let it soar. Speaking of the usage of time, while I really did enjoy the fan service, I think the Wise One scene goes on a little bit long, especially when we consider the scenes that I think could have deserved another minute or two to develop things like, you know, the friendship between the leads. I can be charmed by the yellow brick road scene, but again, thinking of the other things that were cut for time, this could have gone instead. There's a subtle change here, but it also has implications for the story, and that is the prophecy. This is not in the original show, and it says that Elphaba is some sort of chosen one. If true, this does a bit of a disservice to Elphaba's story. Also because the text shows us differently regarding who can or can't read the Grimoire, because we'll see in Act 2 that Nessa herself can read the Grimoire. She messes it up because she's not practiced, but she does. She does cast a spell. And later, Glinda will learn to read it, and Elphaba's trust in her is predicated on the idea that this is a thing that she's capable of doing. So reading the Grimoire isn't because Elphaba's a chosen one, it's a learnable skill. It just is maybe easier for her. This is something that I didn't necessarily dislike, but it does change the meaning. In the show, when Glinda has her name change scene, she is only speaking to Fiyero and elphaba. She notices that they have access to some sort of emotional experience that she isn't privy to, and she finds a way to clumsily and clunkily try to include herself back in it. It's a vulnerable moment, and we see that it's more about trying to reconnect with them than actually make some sort of statement about the animals, but as my friend said, she's trying. The point is that this is one of the instances where we see Glinda be very vulnerable. We see that insecurity that she keeps tamped down so well under her popular facade come out full force. This is one of the rare instances where we see her really fumble, really clumsy in a social situation. Whereas in the film, it significantly changes to Glinda calling the crowd over and then announcing her name change. So this makes the meaning a little bit different. Is Glinda jealous of their moment? Is this a beat between the three of them? Or is this about the crowd? This moment very much reads as more about reconnecting with Fiyero and elphaba than about her status at large or making a point to a crowd. Yes, you can argue she's using the crowd as a crutch to get that, but I do find myself preferring the vulnerability of the stage version. Obviously, Glinda still has a long ways to go, but she's not the same Glinda from the very beginning. She has evolved in her relationship with elphaba. Finally, here are some things that I could just go either way on. The balloon escape was added. A lot of people don't like it, they think it takes too long. That's super fair. I don't mind it, I think it does prolong the scene, but it also gives a good and hilarious beat.
Give me my leg. Give me my leg!
And I also like how it emphasizes Glinda's instincts, because her whole thing is that she's always so worried about how things look, how things are going to come across. And here, when she has to just jump, her instinct is to run away with elphaba, something that we see in the song itself, where she starts singing with her until she's sort of brought out of that fantasy. And finally, this does not matter in the slightest, but everyone is obviously so much older than hypothetical 18-year-old college first years, which is very funny and only occasionally distracting. But also, we could just call this a Broadway homage, because so many of the actors were in their 30s when they played these roles. The only difference here is that with these close-ups, you can see it a little bit more. Anyway, these are my thoughts. I will probably have more at some point. Maybe I'll make a second video, or maybe I'll just wait until part 2 comes out. Let me know what you thought, and we'll have a great conversation in the comments.